All right, at this time, we're back. We're talking with Jessica Eastman Stewart. We're just talking before we started recording about podcast on podcast. Jessica, you have a podcast, both a human one and an AI one, it sounds like. What's the story with your podcast?
Yeah, so I have a podcast called Joyfully Managed Life, and it's just 2 to 3 minute tips for life. And it's actually, I write the content, but it's AI generated, the podcast itself. And so it sounds like my voice because I gave it a bunch of my voice in order to create that, but it's pretty fun. So it's real tips for me, but I don't have to, do the whole recording and editing part. That's all done for me. And it's an interesting tool because it even puts in little like, you know, music, and I write the tip, but it kind of podcastifies it. In other words, like the tip will, close with like, this has been another episode of We Manage, like it adds in some of that I didn't put in. And it automatically, if I had like a link, let's say in the tip, like, oh, this article, something like that, it'll throw that into the show notes.
Well, I'm glad you brought up tips because I feel like you and I met originally because we were giving tips to teachers. You and I
That's
both
right.
used to teach and used to do a lot of stuff with TFA, and we used to, curate resources for people. And you like took your sort of tip and resource skills into an actual job. Kind of share what you do right now, and then I have some interesting questions about talent and being a candidate for jobs and all sorts of stuff. But yeah, how did your job come to be?
Yeah. So, my career is I started as a classroom teacher, then was working at TFA, teacher coaching. And then I ended up kind of a little bit by accident co-founding a nonprofit. I was doing some advocacy in my local education community, and a bunch of us were working on a bunch of issues. We ended up starting a nonprofit. I worked there for a little over 11 years, was kind of a chief of staff type role, as well as the executive director. Then, throughout that, I just had so much fun writing down things that I was learning either about parenting or about running a good organization. So, for fun, like when my kids would be napping when they were tiny, I would like be like, what I'm going to do while they're napping is write a blog about how good 2x2s are, or like how, 5 things that somebody should have told me before I had kids that I needed to purchase. Like I just have always loved sharing tips and creating resources. So started blogging, and then when it was time for me to transition, I briefly thought about going to another job, but then I thought, what if I could turn this into an actual job? And I decided to take the leap and try it. And so these days, I get to write and create tips for people, mostly folks who are, either looking for getting more organized at home or at work or both. And it feels like a big old group text with like 11 to 12,000 of my favorite friends
Oh,
where
it's
I'm
really
like,
it's that high? 10, 12,000?
yeah, yeah. And, like, so for today, for example, I just recently discovered this new chai, and I put it in Friday Five today. I was like, y'all should probably buy this chai because it is delicious. It is going to make me stop going to Starbucks. That's how good it is. A friend of mine gave me a whole box of it. And, I just think it is so fun to get. I mean, people respond. They're like, oh my gosh, I ordered the chai. I'm going to let you know how it goes. And I just have so much fun. Or like, watch this video or read this really good art, or I curate lots of things. I love to read. So, for example, I shared, a tip today from a book I recently read that was about the research that, when you're spending money, you get a lot more benefit from spending small amounts of money frequently than spending a lot of money infrequently. So, in other words, like the research says, like buy the avocado toast and don't feel bad about it. You know what I mean? So, I love doing that kind of thing.
Well, thinking of helping people get organized or helping people kind of make a plan for something, which is what you're really good at. A lot of people who listen to this podcast will be on the talent recruiting side looking for candidates, but a lot of folks who are listening are also probably thinking about applying for a job or in that process. Do you have folks come to you and ask like, "Hey, I'm trying to get my LinkedIn in shape, or I'm trying to figure out how to brand myself well to partners?" If so, what kind of advice do you give them when they're just trying to start?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's so much. I think that on both sides, the candidate side and the recruiting side, I think anything you can systematize is going to make things better. So, I mean, checklists literally save lives. As some nerds like me might have read a book called Checklist Manifesto about the power of them. But whether you're applying for a job or hiring, the things you have to do the best version of that, every time, you can really kind of systematize that. So, if you're looking for a job, that can look like, okay, what is it that I'm going to do every single time I'm interested in applying for a role? right? Like, I'm going to do this LinkedIn search to see if I know anybody connected, right? I'm going to draft a cover letter if I need to. And here in that, there's a link right there to like some of my language that I pull from, right? So what are the things that you want to do every time? You want to send the thank you if you have so could you create a little, this is what I do every time I'm preparing for an interview. This is what I do every time I'm doing a conversation with someone in my network to kind of, let them know I'm looking. I'm going to review their LinkedIn before that meeting so that I can like, see if there's specific things I could be asking them for. I'm going to send them a follow up afterward. What are those things? So the checklists can really, and if you're hiring, same, right? Like you want to make sure that all those little things that can be, easy to forget. After you hire, like take the job down off your website. Like people forget that kind of stuff because they don't have really good systems. What are the things you want to do every time? So I'll give an example. When I was at the nonprofit, one of the things that we put into our hiring checklist was that we wanted everybody involved in a hiring process to take a few minutes to redo the implicit bias test that Harvard has, and then have a conversation as a group. It doesn't need to be too long, about how are we going to overcome some of the implicit biases that we're each bringing into this specific process. And being more aware of them is less likely to have them, impact, right? So that's the kind of thing that we probably would have forgotten to do. But because it was just in a checklist of like, hey, we're going to start a process, let's pull up the checklist, we would be reminded to do that each time. And so I think checklists and just better systems can really help you be kind of the A+ version of yourself every time.
What's your motivation advice then for somebody who's reluctant to get started, at least because they're not looking for a job now, or there isn't the urgency? Oftentimes, urgency is a great motivator, but if that's not true, how do you get people fired up to kind of take these mini steps, small over time, that when you do need to jump into action, you're ready to go? What's the thing that kind of unlocks people's desire to do that?
Yeah, I think, I have a really fun resource on my website. It's free. It's called a Polish Week checklist. So people can go to jessicaeastmanstewart.com/freebies to find it. But this concept of a polish week, and I'll connect your question to this in just a second, is taking time. It doesn't need to be a week. I just call it that because it's a good name. Taking time every so often to kind of polish up all your systems so that they work better for you. This is the kind of stuff like actually restarting your computer and like updating the software instead of like click later. I like wiping down your desk, taking away the stuff you haven't used in 6 months. You're like, why is that post-it still there from September? And so like it's like little polishing up. And when I would lead this with my team, some of the tasks that we would put on our collective list were things like update your resume and your LinkedIn
Hmm.
while you're not even thinking, while you're not looking, right? Like, what are some things you're really proud of that you want to put there? Have you won any awards? So I also would go back to systems. What are something that you could do every 6 months and throw it into either your calendar, send yourself an email and then do it and then snooze it for 6 months, or whatever it is, your system that reminds you once a year, every 6 months, once a quarter, to, do all those little tasks that are going to help you set up success for the future. So that could look like, going into LinkedIn and all the people it tells you maybe connect with because it does its algorithm thing. Like, go connect with 10 people, right? Maybe you want to give. One thing is on my polish list that I do once a quarter. It reminds me to give a LinkedIn recommendation. So I think about the clients I've worked with, or people I've worked with in the past. Anybody I know that has recently kind of said that they're looking for a job, but I worked with them in the past. Like, I just think of one person that I could give a LinkedIn recommendation to say about how great they are. And I do that. And that works for me because people often come back and give me a LinkedIn recommendation, or they just feel really grateful for it. So it feels great, which is awesome. And it's a strategic move as well. So could you try to have a list of, if you asked yourself the thought experiment, what if I lost my job today? Who are the first 5 or 10 people I would need to, I think could help me get my next job? And then what if you just put them into a spreadsheet? It doesn't need to be complicated. And then you kept track of the last time you were in touch with them. And then you could sort it once a quarter and pick one of them that is time to update and go get coffee, get lunch, send them a text, send them an article, like whatever it is, make that little move towards keeping that relationship fresh. I think that, those kinds of systems allow you and make them small micro tasks, because what you're not going to do is, if you're not looking for a job, spend your Saturday like freshening up your whole LinkedIn and, connecting with everybody and all of those things. That's unrealistic. You're not going to prioritize that. So make it something you can do in 5 or 10 minutes. And over time, you will have said, okay, wow, I have like maintained this garden of relationships that's going to be there for me when I need to harvest it.
I imagine the same thing is true in the advice you give to managers in professional settings of any kind of team. But I'm thinking of all the talent teams that I manage, the people that listen are managing teams, all that housekeeping, whether it's job listings, LinkedIn, all the kind of external facing things, same kind of thing. You let it slip a little too long, it feels more and more daunting, and then all of a sudden, it hasn't been updated since 1999, and you're losing things that could come to fruition. So I'm glad you brought that up from the candidate side, because I feel like the same is true on the manager side. And you work with a lot of companies, right, that are asking you to kind of tighten up people's managerial leadership skills. What kind of relationships have you built on that side of the house?
Yeah, most of what I do is lead workshops for teams that are trying to get more organized, or kind of strengthen team culture. So things like, one of my most very popular, the most popular that I did last year was the best practices of great project managers. And I'm actually doing that 3 times next week. So it still remains really
Very good.
popular
Great.
for folks. Get your email under control is another one that, because that is just a universal challenge. There are some people out there who are like over here being like inbox superheroes, but like most people are like, I am overwhelmed. I feel like I'm spending too much time. I'm looking for things all the time. So, that is a popular one. So I try to help teams kind of get more productive in a way that isn't about necessarily doing more, but more doing the most important things and being less burnout. Because I think, there's a lot of people out there who are like, maximize your productivity, in like a very like, I don't know, like just bro kind of way, like maximize your productivity to be the best person you could ever be and get the most done. And I love getting things done. I mean, I love that little dopamine hit of like checking things off a list.
Yeah.
And I'm not here to just do things in the world and like accomplish things. I want to have a good life. And so for me, productivity is all about strategies to spend your time on the things you care about and not spend unnecessary time because you're a hot mess, right? And, if you're a hot mess, just becoming like a little bit less of hot mess. Like if we could do 10% less hot mess,
Big win.
then that's a meaningful impact on your life. And that's what I want to do, is help people just feel more joyful and have more easy lives, honestly.
Yeah. Last thing, you're in my email inbox from your newsletter. Love reading it. Love all the tips. How can people get the same joyful, good stuff in their inbox? Where should they find you?
Yeah. So folks can just go to jessicaeastmanstewart.com/newsletter. And that's the way they can sign up. Folks love the Friday 5. It's got 5 tips a week. And on that page, you can see what people say, which is like, I hate every newsletter except for yours, or like you're the only email newsletter I'm willingly signed up for. So people tend to really enjoy it, and you can unsubscribe anytime, but my guess is people will enjoy it. But I also check out the jessicaeastmanstewart.com/freebies, because there's a whole bunch of free stuff that is good for managers at work or folks who are, like just trying to be more organized at home. I mean, there's a 15-page meeting icebreaker list that people can get, which is like just so helpful to have bookmarked so that you're not spending time like, oh my gosh, what's a book thing I can use? Or there's an appreciation toolkit, because I think people should be doing appreciation better. And so I've got, a deck that people could use to lead a session for their, like a bunch of different activities and printables they can do with their team, as well as just some easy ideas to implement better appreciation practices. So lots of stuff to help people be better leaders at work and home. And so I hope folks go download any freebie that is useful.
Yeah. We'll put all the info in the info description. Jessica, thanks for being on. Great to catch up with you. And thanks everyone for listening to this episode of At This Time. Get them all the places you download your podcast if you like the audio. And now we'll be viral sensations on YouTube and our stunning 4K. Check us out there as well. And until next time, catch you soon.